evening and welcome from the League of Women Voters of the Eden area. My name is Delmo Deladora, and that's for real, that's not made up. I'm Vice President of Programs for the League of Women Voters. Yes, the League does have men members. Welcome to all. I taught on this campus for 20 years, but then they put all the nicest, newest buildings on after I left. So I have to try to come back here just to be able to enjoy them. Our major interest, as you know, for the League of Women Voters, is to get people to register to vote, try to make sure they get out to vote, and most importantly, that they know what they're voting on, to try to provide the information that makes it possible for them to make wise choices when they vote. I'd like to now call on the student, Associated Students Representative, Jordan Leopold.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank you all for coming out. It's been a real honor to work with Dr. Ong on putting on this event here at East Bay. It's really such an honor to have Ben and Jerry online to actually speak with our audience. So, yeah, once again, thank you all for coming out and enjoy the show.
I'd like to now call on the president of the university, Dr. Leroy, Porsche.
Thank you, Delmo, and welcome everybody. It's good to see you here tonight, and we're very excited about this very special event here that we're having. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the Eden Area League of Women Voters for putting on this event tonight. I'd also like to thank Dr. Jennifer Ong for the time she spent trying to organize this in the past few months and working with our associated students and bringing the presenter here today. Tonight's forum covers one of the most intriguing topics, dark money. Now, I don't know much about that, luckily, but I think we'll learn a lot tonight. But the concept of dark money is an important subject and one which remains unfamiliar to the majority of people in the public sector here. With only 3 weeks until the primary elections in California, hopefully tonight's discussion will give us some insights as we go forward into the coming month and coming election, into the election in November. Commissioner Ravel, we are delighted that you are here with us tonight. It's a pleasure meeting you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to talk about tonight. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
The person, as Dr. Mershda indicated, did the planning. I would say probably 99% of the planning and the arranging for this is our president, Dr. Jennifer Ong. I'm going to call on her now.
Thank you, Del. So I have a very, very tight schedule, and John Diaz knows this. So we're going to stay right on. So I wanted to thank everybody who's out here today, because we really do have a great team working together. Joe Woodard, our videographer, and Joseph Lee, they worked really hard so that whoever is not able to attend this program can at least watch us on YouTube and have a very professional presentation in store for us. From, of course, Cal State East Bay, Standing Bearer, Derek Aiken, President Morshida, and also Jordan Leopold. We really appreciate all the time that you spent with us. Randy Saffold was just about ready to give up on me, and he hung in there, so thank you, Randy. We have a really, really great way of informing our community about this problem of dark money in politics. And having found Ben and Jerry's from stampstampede.org, I think you'll agree that as serious as this topic is, there's also a way that we can have a grassroots movement that we can make fun. So later on, we're going to do a group activity, and so that's something new for us. I did want to also recognize our League of Women Voters Board. With us today, of course, is Delmo, and Nancy Van Huffel, who worked on our flyers and outreach, and Renee DeSold and Suzanne Barba. Thank you so much. My lead board makes it so much easier. For Gail Lundholm is also here with us today. And from AUW, American Association of University Women, Linda Slater, thank you so much for all your help. Commissioner Ravel and I met, close to a year ago, and I approached her after she spoke at their league convention for California, and I said, would you mind speaking in our little town of Hayward? And she said, Jen, my mother was a league member, my grandmother was a league member, you just tell me what you need, I'll be there. And so when she got appointed by President Obama, we figure, oh, well, it'll take them a few months, they won't be able to make up their mind in DC. But because she is so impressive, that she went right through the appointment process, and so she is now the vice chair of the Federal Elections Committee, having served as the chair of the FEPC. We're so very lucky to have you here. She made sure they didn't have any kinds of meetings around the date that we finally came upon. So thank you very much for coming to our event, and we're seeing a lot of new faces. Share the information. And I'm going to go ahead and welcome back, Delador. Thank you.
Let me just mention a little bit about the program format. We're going to, right on the phone at the moment, are Ben and Jerry. And you may have been disappointed when you came in and didn't see ice cream cones or available goodies of that sort. But they sold the place long ago, so we're not going to do them much good by buying ice cream tonight anyway. They're going to join us in a conversation, and you're going to have a chance to also ask them questions. Let me point out, those of you who've been to league meetings before know that the questions are placed on 3x5 cards. Gail has some right there, and Linda back there. If you'd like to have a card at any time to put a question on, just put your hand up. And then after you finish writing your question, put your hand up again, and somebody will come pick it up. It'll probably be Gail or Linda on that side. We're going to start with a 4-minute video from Ben and Jerry's, and then we're going to have a phone conversation with them, as I said, and you'll have a chance to ask them questions. And then we're going to have John Diaz speak to us, and then Ann Ravel will appear, and we're going to also have an opportunity to have questions at each session, that is, each of the 3 people speaking. There will be a time provided for asking questions or turning in your questions. We can't promise you every question you ask will be answered, but we will promise you they certainly will be looked at, and whatever time available will be used for that purpose. I'm going to introduce our moderator for the evening, John Diaz, who began his journalism career as a reporter for the Red Bluff Daily News. How far is that from here, John?
A long ways.
And then he was promoted to the Washington, D.C. bureau of that newspaper's parent company. He then worked for the Associated Press in Philadelphia, then as a State House reporter and assistant city editor in Denver Post. You'll notice he's working his way back toward the west because he's coming in. He started at the Chronicle in 1990 as an assistant city editor. And before joining the opinion pages of the San Francisco Chronicle, John directed the newspaper's East Bay news coverage. So he knows our area maybe even better than we do. Mr. Diaz received a Distinguished Alumnus Award from his alma mater, Humboldt University, in 2009, and was the university's commencement speaker in 2010. So please join me in welcoming editorial page editor of the San Francisco Chronicle, John Diaz, who will be serving as the moderator for tonight's forum.
Thank you very much, Del, for that generous introduction. Thank you, President Morishita, for having us here, Jordan, for your introduction, and on behalf of the students. Thanks, Jennifer Ong and the League of Women Voters. I have to tell you, as somebody who has been in the opinion writing business for the last 18 years at the San Francisco Chronicle, how gratifying it is to see all of you here tonight. Because I can't tell you, I can't count the number of times I've heard an elected official or someone who's a political operative tell me, You know, the only people who really worry about money in politics are editorial writers. You know, the rest of the public really doesn't care. And so your attendance here is testament that people do care, so I really appreciate that. Just a real brief introduction to the subject, because I know you're going to want to see the video as well as, you know, hear from Ben and Jerry, is if you look at the post-Watergate reforms that came out after the Watergate scandal, they really rested on two principles. One is the amount of money from any given source should be limited. And two, the identity of significant contributors should be made public. Those two principles from 1974 until close to today have really guided this country's view on campaign money. Now, those two principles have also been eviscerated by some recent Supreme Court decisions. One came in 2010, known as Citizens United, where the Supreme Court, conservative majority in a divided court, ruled that corporations and labor unions have a free speech right to spend as much money as they want for or against candidates, as long as their spending is done, quote unquote, independently of the official campaigns. Now, I'm sure we're going to be getting into the specifics there soon, that's in some ways really a distinction without a difference. But a number of things happened after that 2010 Citizens United decision. First, we saw the rise of the so-called super PACs, where you had these ideological groups banding together, most notably the Koch brothers on the right, but there were also super PACs on the left that emerged, including one by a lot of former of the Obama team from 2008. And so we saw this rise of these PACs that were actually, in many ways, spending more money than the campaign itself. This is a really fairly recent phenomenon. I've been covering politics a long time, where the independent expenditures are actually spending more than the campaigns themselves. So what does that mean? Who's defining the issue? The candidates or the ideological groups that want to get them there? So it's really an ominous development. The very practical effect is that normally for a federal election, the campaign limit would be $2,600. But if you are really determined to get somebody in office, you can spend as much money as you want, as long as you can give your $2,600 to the campaign and spend $1 million or more on a particular candidate. And we've seen contributions, particularly at the presidential level, on that magnitude. And the other thing that we've seen since Citizens United, and this is something that Ann Ravel has been very involved with, is the phenomenon of dark money, where not only you have these major contributions coming, but you had no idea where it came from. And so that was the effect of Citizens United in 2010. Then, if that was not bad enough, just very recently, we had a decision, McCutcheon versus the FEC, which was the second big blow, which really got rid of the backdoor contributions and said, okay, it's not enough that we're letting big contributors come in, big money come in through the back door with independent expenditures. Let's let them in the front door. Let me give you a quick definition of what that McCutcheon decision did. Up until that decision, within the last couple months, there was a limit, if you were a big spender, of the amount that you could contribute to political parties and candidates across the country. Remember, there's that $2,600 limit. But the aggregate limit, the amount total you could spend on federal campaigns, was $123,200. In other words, you were limited into how you can influence the direction of the Congress or the Senate as a whole. Well, the court, again, divided, conservative majority, ruled that that aggregate limit as well was a violation of the individual's free speech right. In other words, money is speech. They can spend as much as they want. So what does that mean in terms of what is the aggregate limit now? Well, if you do the math, and I did not do it myself because I'm a journalist, as we, sometimes in newsrooms you'll see a sign, it'll say, warning journalists doing math. I did not, thank God for calculators. But those who are better at math than me, if you add up all the federal races and all the political parties, the limit that was $123,200 is now the effective limit is more like $3.5 million. Now, this is a big deal for a couple of reasons. One is that the reasoning of the Supreme Court was basically, well, if you're really only giving $2,600 to a lot of races, you're really not going to have a disproportionate or disturbing influence on the whole, on any particular candidate. So why can't you give to as many people as you want? But the practical effect, and we see this time and time again, is money moves around. You may give to 435 different races, but that money, your contribution will be then shifted to particular targeted races. So it really does allow a few big spenders to have disproportionate influence. Before we get to the video, which I think will be a good introduction into the whole Stamp Out Money campaign, I have to remark that there's really a couple of things that I encounter when I try and make this argument to folks who are not engaged. One is, why bother with campaign finance laws anyway? Because money's going to find its way to influence no matter what we do. And so that's sort of the argument number one. And there are also a fair number of people out there who say, why restrict what people could give at all as long as we know what they're giving? Then politicians pay the price for, if they're seen as perceived as beholden to big oil or organized labor or, pick your special interests. Well, again, this is my practical experience from 18 years in journalism. The thing I hear, the thing I see time and time again, and Ann's gonna, I'm sure, have some stories about this from when she was head of the State Fair Political Practices Commission, is my experience is that politicians tend to think the hit that they take, either in fines or bad publicity, especially after the election, for having either spent too much money or taken too much money from special interests, is well worth the value that they get out of actually getting the money. So I would contend that we do need campaign finance reform. And it's a continued evolutionary process. It's not like we can ever at any point, I think, declare victory. But why don't we start with a video and give all of you a look at what the Stamp Out Money campaign is doing.
Yo, it's Ben.
Jerry,
Yeah, the ice cream dudes.
the co-founders.
Right. We're right here. Well, no, we're not right here, but we're on the screen. We wanted to talk to you a little about getting money out of politics. Money in politics is really the root of everything that's screwed up with the country, and there sure are a lot of things screwed up in the country, wouldn't you say? God love it.
The environment.
The environment, right. It's why we can't get any decent environmental laws passed, because the chemical companies are paying the politicians not to pass the laws.
Energy policy.
Right, because the oil companies are bribing the politicians not to pass decent energy policy laws.
Military-industrial complex.
Right, because the defense contractors are bribing the politicians.
And on and on and on and on.
Right, to say nothing of the banks that are screwing over the students by making them pay such ridiculously high rates. And the government says, hey, no problem, because the banks are paying off the politicians too.
So we need to get money out of politics.
Right. We need to change it so that the corporations and the wealthiest amongst us no longer are able to spend unlimited sums of money buying politicians.
And the way we need to do that is to get a constitutional amendment.
Correct. A constitutional amendment and state and federal laws that can help to solve the problem somewhat until the amendment gets passed.
And it says that corporations are not people.
No, corporations are not people.
We know that.
No, it's just 5 Supreme Court justices. They're a little A bunch of them used to be corporate lawyers.
Right. So
Right.
corporations are not people, and money is not speech.
No, money is not speech. Speech is speech. Money is money.
So, in order to do this, we've begun the stamp stampede.
Right. The beauty of the stamp stampede is that we're building the movement by spreading messages on paper currency. It's economic jujitsu. We're using money to stamp money out of politics. I mean, check that out once more. I mean, the beauty of this is that if you get pissed about the situation, you just stamp it out. Visit stampstampede.org, get your own stamp. It's something you can do anywhere, anytime, and boy, is it fun. Are you having fun?
It's 100% legal.
100% legal.
It's a non-profit campaign.
And you join 20,000 other stampers around the country.
Stampstampede.org, stamp money out of politics. Each bill in circulation is seen by over 800 people, and it helps build the grassroots movement.
Check this out. This is my favorite stamp, not to be used for bribing politicians.
Hope you're all having a great time.
Bye-bye.
Just to be sure, Ben and Jerry, that will be legal tender at Ben and Jerry's, right?
Absolutely. I think we're going to start giving discounts for that.
Freak, should we go to the video?
This is the Amendomatic Stampmobile, the amazing Amendomatic Stampmobile. It is the flagship of the Stampede campaign, which is part of the movement to get money out of politics by amending the Constitution. Well, there's two different ways to do it. One is to pass an amendment that says that corporations are not people and money is not free speech. Another way to do it is to pass an amendment that says that all federal elections must be exclusively publicly funded. Everybody would get the same amount. And we spread the message by stamping messages on dollar bills. So the favorite one that everyone likes the best is not to be used for bribing politicians. This is the amazing Amendomatic Stampmobile, and the way it works is that you put your dollar in one of these platens, and they're suspended by on that monorail, on the blue miniature monorail, and then it goes into the spiral elevator, which was actually inspired by a ride at Coney Island. And then it goes down by gravity, and it comes to Corpo Man, who flips to one side and shows that he's really a corporation. And then it comes to Money Mouth, who indicates he's trying to speak with money. And then it eventually comes down and gets stamped. It's some people call it the hardest way ever to stamp a dollar bill, but we figured it out. Every time you put a dollar bill into circulation, 875 people see it as it gets passed around. So this is a great way to make your voice heard, to build the movement, to amend the Constitution, to get money out of politics, and preserve our democracy. One nation, uncorruptible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you very much, Ben and Jerry. Let me start by asking you about your proposal for a constitutional amendment, which, let the record show, the Chronicle editorial page has supported, after the McCutcheon decision, the idea that really the only way to change the dynamic here is with the constitutional amendment. But needless to say, it is a very tall order, which requires not only a supermajority in both the Republican-controlled House and, at the moment, the Democratic-controlled House, but also ratification by the states. What is your strategy for going about this path? There's a couple different ways. You can start in the Congress, or you can have the states have conventions. Do you have an idea on which would be the most likely way to make this happen?
Well, mostly the idea is to continue to put more and more pressure on Congress to pass an amendment, or at least propose an amendment to the states. And the way we're doing that is by having local resolutions and referenda on the municipal level and on the state level. So right now, there's about 550 municipalities that have voted in favor of amending the Constitution to say that corporations are not people and money is not speech. In addition, 16 states have also voted for such an amendment. And currently, there's about 150 members of Congress at the federal level that have signed on to one amendment or another. And really just last week, Vermont became the first state in the Union to call for a constitutional convention, which, as you mentioned, is the other method of amending the Constitution. But all of this is just creating more and more pressure on politicians to change the laws.
Do you think the status quo as we have it right now, the level of citizen outrage is sufficient to make it happen? Or are we going to have another Watergate before people rise up in arms against money in politics?
Well, I think that this movement to amend the Constitution to get money out has been growing and developing more and more momentum. There's many national organizations that are involved in the movement. People for the American Way, Free Speech for People, Public Citizen, and just last year, some organizations that had formerly had no interest in this kind of thing have jumped on the bandwagon. That would be Greenpeace and the Sierra Club and the Communication Workers of America. So, those organizations are just realizing that there's no way that they can get the legislation they need passed until we get money out of politics, until our politicians are no longer in the pocket of the corporations that we need to regulate.
Do you see any leaders emerging, at least in the political world, to try and make this happen? A lot of us remember in 2008 when Barack Obama was Senator Obama and a candidate for president, he very emphatically and actually fairly effectively said, I do not want independent expenditures helping my campaign. I'm going to do this the right way. I'm going to do it with small individuals. And of course, he had this incredible grassroots campaign. Well, fast forward to 2012, after Citizens United, President Obama going for re-election, not only did not make any attempt to stop a soft money campaign from helping his campaign with independent expenditures, but a lot of the same people who were involved in the Obama campaign 2008 went and worked on the quote-unquote dark side and had independent expenditures. How are you going to get a leader who's going to be willing to have the same principle once he or she determines that, hey, soft money, dark money is no longer to my disadvantage?
Well, I think the reality is that under the current system, under the current ground rules, politicians have to take money from rich people, corporations, dark money, I mean, whoever you can get it from, in order to be competitive in an election. But I think that same politician that's doing that needs to pledge to change that system once they're in office. And that's what I think we have to do. And there's several campaigns that are working on that very thing. So, a few months ago in the middle of the winter, I was walking in New Hampshire with Larry Lessig on a campaign to make this a major issue in the presidential elections coming up. So there's a whole contingent of people that have been organizing and gaining more and more strength so that we can use this upcoming presidential election. And the primaries, the campaigning for the primaries in New Hampshire has already begun. So already we're starting to force the candidates to address this issue and say what they're going to do to get money out of politics.
To your knowledge, is there any potential presidential candidate who has said, I do not want independent expenditures, any super PACs operating on my behalf in 2016?
Well, I'm not aware of it. I am aware that Bernie Sanders has been making noises like maybe he might run, and I'd be surprised if he took PAC money, but that's as much as I know about it.
Let's go to a couple audience questions. Here's one for Ben and Jerry. How in the heck did you ever get interested in this issue? I mean, obviously, why weren't you contributing to candidates for the Farm Bill for ice cream supporters or something? There you go. All seriousness, how did this become front and center, so identified with you and your company?
Well, Ben and Jerry's has campaigned on many different issues over the years, and I've personally been involved in various campaigns over the years. For a long time, I devoted most of my efforts to shifting money out of the Pentagon budget and into social needs. And, eventually it dawns on you that that we're not getting anywhere on any of those specific issues because of this particular issue, the issue of money in politics, the issue that the corporations that we're trying to regulate own the politicians because they bought them. And that there's, so in terms of money being the root of all evil, I would say in politics, it is. And so if there's any particular issue that we care about that favors the people instead of the corporations, we're never going to make any headway on it until we address this root cause. And so, that's one of the reasons I got involved in it. I think the other reason was that I was involved in the Occupy movement, and as that movement started getting kind of less focused, and the original issue was about economic disparity, and then it became most anything. I was trying to get some focus, and I felt like the common denominator amongst most of the Occupy issues was the issue of money in politics. And so that's how I got to that place. It's interesting that Jerry, who's sitting beside me here, has been focusing a lot of his energy on the issue of GMO labeling, to require labels on food products to say whether or not they have GMO ingredients. And so he's been campaigning on that, and there have been initiatives. And then I've been campaigning on getting money out of politics, and he was just in the state of Washington. Well, why don't you tell him about what happened?
Well, it was true in California also. There was a ballot initiative 2 years ago in California and last year in Washington State. And despite the fact that most people in polling want to have the right to know what's in their foods, there was enormous spending of millions of dollars by food companies and biotech companies like Monsanto and Dow, and those referendums were ultimately narrowly defeated. And it's, as Ben mentioned, it's the same money from the corporations. And it's kind of interesting. You mentioned before about are people really responding to this? And when you look at polling on people's concern about money in politics, it's across the board, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, Independents. It's 80 to 90% of people want to get money out of politics, but most people don't feel like there's anything they can do about it. That's the big issue.
Let's go to another audience question, noting, as you indicated earlier, that there are several versions of a constitutional amendment being circulated on Capitol Hill. Is there one that you think is particularly clear or effective?
Well, I think the Udall amendment is really pretty good. I mean, I think a lot. I mean, they're all mostly talking about the same thing. It's a question of wording. I mean, a few of them talk specifically about just overturning Citizens United, which I don't believe will solve the problem. I think the problem was pretty big before Citizens United. But essentially saying that corporations are not people, and for the purpose of elections, money is not free speech. I think that works, and I believe, well, also what happened a few weeks ago is that the Senate made a decision that they're gonna that this amendment, I believe it's Udall's amendment, is going to go out of committee, and that there's going to be a floor vote on it. So that, that's a tremendous amount of headway for this movement. I mean, this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. I mean, we I see this as about a 10-year effort, but it's got to be done. Otherwise, we may as well just hand over the keys to our democracy to the corporations.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think simplicity is really the key here, to be straightforward as possible instead of getting into fancy going after one particular Supreme Court decision, because if you read the Constitution, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but you can't be an editorial writer without having a well-worn copy of the Constitution on your desk. It seems like the simpler and clearer the language, the better, so we don't get into a Second Amendment type of ambiguity. It seems like, if you just say that people have a right to regulate money in the political campaigns, that could probably do it. Here is another question from the audience, and that involves, please describe some of the interesting results you've seen with people using the stamped money. Are there any people who have run into shopkeepers who have looked at scans, or do you have anecdotes of people asking about it as a result being converted to the issue? How's it working out?
I stamp all my money, and I've never had any problem spending it. Everybody seems to like to take money, what's become interesting is that that people who are not at all associated with the campaign are starting to find the stamped money, and then they take photographs of it with their smartphones and, tweet it out or send it to Instagram or Facebook, and we end up, we search them once a week and find all these people saying, hey, this is really cool. They're finally talking about what's really important. So the idea is that eventually, as more and more people get more and more involved in this, we will reach critical mass, and people will start to see stamped money as a normal part of life, and that will start building this movement more and more. I'm going to be going out to the state of Washington next week to help with a petition campaign to get a ballot initiative on their ballot calling for a constitutional amendment. And it's that viral aspect of building a movement that helps more and more states and more people to work to do something about it, to pass resolutions or referenda on the state and local level. The amazing thing is that money has been viral before the word viral came into general usage, in terms of the internet. But stamped money and the way it circulates, going from hand to hand and spreads throughout the country, is an amazing medium. And, you talk about each bill that gets stamped gets seen by 875 people. If you do the math, and one person stamps 3 bills a day for a year, that generates 1 million impressions. It gives the common person an incredible megaphone, and that's what builds the movement. As there's more and more visibility.
And as Ben mentioned before, there's now over 20,000 stamps that have been distributed from Stamp Stampede. It's a nonprofit, and we're selling stamps at cost. So the idea is just to get people stamping. And for people who may not want to go to meetings or may not want to join organizations, you can sit home and stamp your money and spend it. And as we always say here, it's only slightly subversive and it's totally legal.
For those who are in the audience or those who later view this online, how do we go about getting that stamp? Is there a website? Is it on your website? Can you get it at your local Ben & Jerry's? What would your suggestion be?
Well, so if you want to get stamping, you can go to the website, which is stampstampede.org. And Ben is making a very generous offer on this phone call. He's going to give out his discount code. And if you buy a stamp using the discount code, it's a buy one, get one free.
Yes, it is my personal discount code as the head stamper, but in honor of this momentous occasion, I'd like to pass it along to you guys. It is BC25. B as in boy, C as in Cohen, 25. So you just punch that in at the end of your experience on the Stamp Stampede website, and you buy one, get one free. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, thanks, Ben and Jerry. I've just lost my audience. They're all now on their smartphones clicking away.
Ben and Jerry, I just wanted to thank you. Ashley actually had helped us out from your office, and she overnighted 5 stamps to share with our audience today. So everybody will be leaving with at least $1 bill stamped with the stamp that you sent us.
That's beautiful. I'm sorry that she wasn't also able to overnight ice cream.
Just one more quick question, if I could, Ben and Jerry, because I'm curious. Certainly, a lot of businesses have paid a price for their political involvement with either boycotts or people, one ideological persuasion or another, not being disinclined to go there. Has this been good for business or bad for business that you've taken up this crusade, if you will, of money in politics?
It's interesting. In terms of Ben & Jerry's taking political stands, at the very beginning, when we first started doing it, everybody was saying it was going to be bad for business, and they were also saying that that's not something business does. Business doesn't take political stands. Business isn't supposed to do that. And what we realized is that business is an incredibly political animal, and businesses are taking political stands every day, left and right. And the difference is that most businesses are taking political stands covertly. They don't want you to know about it. And they're taking political stands that are in their own narrow self-interest. What Ben and Jerry's did, the big innovation at Ben and Jerry's, was that we were just taking political stands overtly, and we were taking political stands that were in the interests of the community, of our customers in general. And people love it. It builds tremendous consumer loyalty. I mean, people realize that they're relating, that here's a company that agrees with their values. And that's a very, very, very deep connection.
Well, and it's also important that the ice cream tastes good.
Great. Well, Ben and Jerry, thank you very much, and please join me in thanking. I know it's late back there, and really appreciate you joining us tonight. Great. Well, now let me, if I could, introduce our keynote speaker. Commissioner Ann Ravel is Vice Chair of the Federal Election Commission for 2014. She was nominated to the Federal Election Commission by President Barack Obama in June 2013. Her appointment received the unanimous consent of the United States Senate, which is not easy to do, especially in a Senate where sometimes even one senator objecting can hold up an appointment. From March 2011 until her appointment to the FEC, Ms. Ravel served as Chair of the California Fair Political Practices Commission, to which Governor Jerry Brown appointed her. At the FPPC, Ravel oversaw the regulation of campaign finance, lobbyist registration and reporting, and ethics and conflict of interest related to office holders and public employees. Needless to say, not the most popular job in Sacramento. Her work in just doggedly exposing the source of an $11 million donation on 2 California ballot measures in 2012 drew praise from no less an authority than the San Francisco Chronicle editorial page. I was looking back on the clips and I saw that we used terms like take charge leader, tough-minded pursuit of wrongdoing to describe her work and trying to expose that dark money. Before joining the FPPC, Ravel served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Torts and Consumer Litigation in the Civil Division of the United States Department of Justice. Do you ever take a job with a title that's easy to pronounce? Ravel also worked as an attorney in the Santa Clara County Counsel's office. She served as elected Board of Governor on the Board of Governors of the State Bar of California. In 2007, the State Bar named her Public Attorney of the Year for her contributions to public service. She received her BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and her JD from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. As they say in the legal world, we will stipulate you are an expert on these issues. Please welcome Ann Ravel.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Thank you, President Morishita. I appreciate it. And the League of Women Voters, as I have told everybody and Jennifer said, thank you, Jennifer. I have a special place in my heart for the League of Women Voters. And looking back on my upbringing, I'm sure that it's the League that has made me interested in politics and political issues, and that's probably why I'm here today. So thank you for all the good work you do, and thank you, Jordan, from the Associated Students. Thanks for having me. And it's also wonderful to share the virtual stage with Ben and Jerry. They have done a lot by this campaign to get interest in the important issues of money in politics. And that is hard to do. And I know, John, you mentioned this, but you know, when I started in Washington, I went around to talk to people, both Republicans and Democrats, and a lot of people who are involved in political law, about the issues of sort of reform and reform of money in politics and the like. And I was told exactly what the people you've interviewed said. And they said, nobody cares about campaign finance. As much as you care about it, nobody actually in the public cares about it. And I said, no, it's not true, because when we did that $11 million contribution case before the election in California, people really cared. They cared about knowing about who was behind the money. They cared that people were coming from out of state to try to influence the elections, and they wanted to know why they couldn't know about it. So I actually believe people do care about it, but unfortunately, it hasn't translated to action in very many ways. And so that's actually one of my messages today. I'm here to talk narrowly about dark money, but one of my main messages, because I'm a government person, is everyone should get involved. You really need to be involved, especially you students who are here today. This is the future of your country, and it's important for you to care about these issues because they do impact everything. It has, if you care about lots of different issues, the campaign finance has an impact on all of those things. So get involved, become active in government, certainly you must vote, and even vote in off presidential years, right? You know, let's talk about the questions of campaign finance. I mean, the questions have been, as it was mentioned, pretty much since this country was founded, but it became really important, and the laws changed significantly after Watergate. And a lot of people don't remember, I certainly didn't, but many of you may remember this. I mean, at heart, the Watergate issues, which you all must remember, those of you who are old enough. I mean, I was in law school. People were glued to the television sets to watch the Watergate hearings. And if you think about the Watergate hearings, it really, most people think it was about, you know, the burglars, and it was about the cover-up, and it was about, you know, President Nixon resigning. But really, at its heart, it was about campaign finance. That's what it was about. It was about people going with bags of money to the White House. And of course, the bags of money at that time contained $250,000, which today is chump change, right? But nonetheless, they were going to the White House to pay for the burglars so that they could, you know, get information and discredit the opposing party. But also, in addition to that, the campaign for the president, for President Nixon, was soliciting money, millions of dollars, from corporate interests. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention that the money that went to the White House actually came through Mexico. So it came through a circuitous route, and it was anonymous. It was given anonymously. And then there was corporate money. You know, back then, before Citizens United, corporations couldn't contribute to campaigns. But corporate money was being given to the Nixon campaign in order to get benefits with lower taxes. And that really got people angry. And it created an amazing sort of widespread distrust of government. People believed then that the political process was corrupt and for sale to the highest bidder. And this was what led to campaign finance reform, as John mentioned. And basically, I mean, in the issues that I'm interested in, while it had campaign limitations and the like, it also had very vigorous disclosure. And the belief was, and even the language of the ballot measure for the established the FPPC in California basically said it was intended to instill public trust in government by having the contributors to campaigns, the expenditures that were being done in political campaigns, and all other information made public. Disclosure and transparency was key. And it was felt that if people understood who was giving to campaigns, then they would have greater trust. Well, some of these reforms apparently have not turned out that well. And it isn't because disclosure isn't important. It's because, as mentioned also, I mean, the legal landscape has changed. Citizens United, as mentioned, and McCutcheon. And in particular, it's really interesting. I think in particular, I'm more concerned about McCutcheon, because if you look at the language of the opinion, and it's kind of the plurality opinion, and it's sort of a great education for any of you to read this. It's kind of a jaw dropper, but if you read it, what it basically says is that campaign finance reform is definitely on its last legs. But what the courts have always said, even in McCutcheon and even in Citizens United, is that disclosure is important. But we know that there are loopholes, these dark money loopholes and schemes that allow money to influence the electorate without any of the transparency of those who are involved. And, you know, I love the term dark money is great because it sounds really nefarious, which it is, but the problem with it is it's not really descriptive, because that money is not dark to the recipients. The recipients know where that money is coming from, and it's a lot of money. But it's the public that doesn't know. It's the public that's kept in the dark. So I think that it was also mentioned about the California case that we did last year, and it's settled right before I left to go to the FEC. And it's a really good example, and I'm going to spend just a couple minutes to talk to you about sort of how the money went in that case, because it is incredible to see what lengths people will go to keep information from the public. In California, it was, as was said, 2 initiatives on the ballot. There was a consultant who was a fundraiser basically for a political committee that was against Prop 30 and in favor of Prop 32. And when he was doing the fundraising, he said, okay, you can give the money to the committee if you wish, but then your names will have to be disclosed under California law. But if you want to do what's called issue ads, which would be related to the campaign, of course, but not specifically mentioning those ballot measures, then we'll take your money, we'll keep your names anonymous, and send it to a Virginia nonprofit, and they'll do the issue ads. Well, unfortunately, what happened was, actually, there was $25 million raised for that purpose, and it went to Virginia, to this nonprofit, by all people in California who wanted to remain anonymous. But they made sort of a grave error in there. This was sort of a comedy of grave errors, actually, but they made a grave error, and they didn't run the ads soon enough. And in California, If you run an issue ad within 60 days of the election, then it could be considered a campaign ad. And so they realized that they couldn't produce the ads, it was too close. So the person who had the consultant who had raised all the money said to the Virginia organization, you know what, you're gonna have to ship your money elsewhere. And so what he did was he discovered a group that he knew to be related to a nationwide network of these nonprofits that ship money all over the country. And he realized that if he sent the money there, that probably that same money could be sort of laundered and come back to California, to the campaign. And that's what happened. They sent the money to this Arizona group, Center to Protect Patients' Rights. The consultant in California had a kind of a tacit agreement with the person who ran that group that this money, this $25 million, was actually going to come back to California as a contribution to the campaign. And then that Center for Protect Patients' Rights gave the money to 2 other nonprofits, one in Arizona, one in Iowa. The one in Iowa set up another sort of fly-by-night group that only existed for the campaign to receive the money and give the money to those particular ballot measures. And the Arizona group, gave the $11 million to the exact same California political committee that was asking for the money to begin with. So they gave the money for the purposes that in California you would have to disclose your donors, but because they went through all these circuitous routes with these groups that were shell entities, one of them or a couple of them existed only as post office box, and these pop up for the campaign and then they disappear. And there's really no apparent purpose for any of these groups except to hide the source of the funds. In California, we fortunately there was a complaint, and so we investigated it, and ultimately the outcome of it, the settlement, was we had $1 million settlement, and we asked for disgorgement of the $15 million. It was interesting. The entire $25 million was supposed to come back to California, but because the FPPC was taking them to court, they were concerned about sending the money back, so they never sent the money back that was originally intended to come back to California. But, you know, this kind of behavior really leads to more dissatisfaction with government and distrust and disassociation from government. And recently there was a Pew Research poll in which they said only 19% of Americans trust the federal government. After Watergate, the very same question was asked. It's asked every couple years. 36% of Americans trusted the federal government. I really do think that this is a very bad portent, and I know that things like the stamp stampede are a good example of people feeling that they have the power to change this and that they can do something to change it. And there's others. I testified last week, I think, before the Senate on the issue of dark money. And I was really just talking about the California case, but Justice Stevens, former Supreme Court Justice, retired, also spoke, and he has written a book, and he too is talking about a constitutional amendment, and Senator Udall was on that committee. So there's definitely more impetus to give more disclosure, to do something in a broad way. But I, being older, unlike Ben and Jerry, I can't wait 10 years for a constitutional amendment. And what I have decided is something that I think is achievable is more disclosure. And disclosure is, you know, a lot of people do think that it's not that significant and it's not enough of a move forward, but I think it's a pretty important move forward. And I think, for example, if there's information about who's behind campaigns in every area, we could do what the Supreme Court says campaign finance is about and ferret out corruption. You could determine if people are from foreign governments or foreigners who are giving to campaigns, and that's illegal to do. But also, more importantly, and this is what I care about, it gives people information about who's giving, how much, what it's spent on. And I think that's crucial because most people are busy and they rely on voting queues to make decisions about how to vote. And some of those voting queues are things like what party is the person in, and that, you know, for some people it's a queue. For other people, a queue is, you know, who's supporting them and what interests do they have. I mean, you look at some of the initiatives and what do you go to? You go to the bottom of the initiative and you look to see who's signed off on the argument. And then you know, because initiatives are so difficult to understand, you know sort of what interests you might have that align with whoever it is. So voting queues, I think, are really important. And there's a great example of that many of you probably remember. In 2010 election in California, there was an initiative on the ballot, and I can't remember the name of the committee that was, these committees all have names like, you know, Apple Pie and Love and America and We Hate Taxes and things like that. And this was one of those. And the whole point of the initiative was to say that local governments, if they were going to establish their own energy companies for the benefits of their local communities, would have to get 2/3 vote of the community, of the voters, in order to establish such a company. And of course, when Mom and Apple Pie is suggesting that, that sounds really like a great idea. Why not? People should vote. But then, because of disclosure, it came to the fore that it was actually PG&E that was supporting this initiative almost entirely. Just about every penny was from PG&E. And in fact, in that election, PG&E spent $46 million on that initiative, and the opposition spent $130,000. And yet that initiative did not succeed. So I think meaningful disclosure does increase public trust, and because I'm so interested in this, I've looked at some studies, and there's a study that I read that said that the feeling that someone understands policies that impact them does increase trust in political institutions. And the converse is also true. Lack of that information leads to apathy and alienation. And I think for many reasons, that's what we're seeing in this country. We're seeing people who say they don't want to vote because, A, partly they feel like their vote doesn't count, but also, I think, because they don't really get sufficient information about how to vote. So once again, I'll end and be grilled by the Chronicle editorial board. It's very important, I think, for people to get involved in politics at every single level. Demand the country that we all deserve, and the only way to demand that is by voting, by getting involved, by understanding what the issues are. So politics is everybody's job. I appreciate it. Thank you.
go here, right? I think we move up to thank you very much. One of the things that struck me, let me just start with a general question, I think, which would be a good primer on the issue for the audience. A lot of people, when they hear about all these corporate contributions and these recent decisions, a lot of people are not aware that direct corporate contributions to candidates are illegal to this day and have been illegal for a century. So how does the system work? How do we hear about business influencing the political system through money? Maybe you can help our audience understand how through political action committees, indirect and direct ways, the corporate money does find its way into politics.
Yes, direct corporate contributions are still not legal in this country, and actually the bifurcation that the Supreme Court has talked about is the difference between contributions directly to a candidate versus contributions or expenditures that don't go directly to a candidate. And it was alluded to about coordination, and that is another thing that the courts have always, or in Citizens United, the court said when they said it was okay for corporations, and that includes nonprofits and unions as well, they still cannot give direct contributions to candidates because that's considered corrupting. But if you give the money in a different way to either a super PAC or through dark money, 501c4s, that is not considered corrupting. And that's the distinction. So they're able to give the money in other ways, although that money nonetheless does find ways to find its way to the candidate.
One of the things I see all the time in looking at campaign finance statements is you'll look at a candidate for the legislature, particularly a newcomer, and you'll look at their contributors, and a lot of times you'll see, there's 120 members of the legislature, sometimes dozens of contributions from fellow legislators. And what you have there, and I'm sure, and this is something that when you're at FEC, it was pretty obvious, is that basically leadership is dictating who other legislators should be given to.
Yes, and that was an issue that was raised in the McCutcheon case because the fear that the government articulated in eliminating the cap for contributions to lots of different candidates was that it would open the floodgates to these transfers of money to other candidates. And so it could be amassed in a way that would basically obviate the whole thinking behind campaign contribution limitations. And Justice Roberts in McCutcheon said, and some people have said that they thought that maybe this was not like an honest belief that he had when he said it, but he said, well, of course, that problem of earmarking of money or transfers of too much money could be remedied by Congress or by the Federal Election Commission. And, as a member of the Federal Election Commission, we are emulating Congress in being stalemated on every issue just about.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. Why is it stalemated? Is it between the Republican and Democratic appointees, and are there coalition builders or consensus seekers in your group? Besides you, of course.
Yes. The composition of the Federal Election Commission now is 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, I'm one, and theres another, and then one of them who considers himself an independent. And I think that the problem is that on some issues, I realized very soon, it's possible to be a coalition builder, and I've tried to do that because I'm used to being in California, where, we had on the FPPC Republicans and Democrats, and we were able to achieve consensus quite often. And I don't believe that campaign finance is a partisan issue. I think it affects Republicans, independents, and Democrats equally, especially dark money and the amassing of money. So I had kind of a rosy-eyed view that perhaps we could achieve something on some of the major issues, but on small issues it was possible for me to go and vote with the Republicans, but on the big issues there was never going to be any hope that there was going to be reciprocation.
I love what you were saying about how oftentimes deceptive these names of various interest groups are. In fact, oftentimes they are exactly the opposite of what they're trying to do. Like you'll have a big oil will be, funding some group for, Americans for cleaner energy or something like that. I mean, it really is that often. But I want to hear more about your effort, which you received a lot of attention, a lot of credit in tracking down the dark money in that California case. Just explaining that for those who don't remember, Prop 30, which was Jerry Brown's proposed tax increases, and then Prop 32, which was restricting the use of union dues in politics. This group was about patients' rights. It seems like a little bit of, not exactly a linear connection. But I'm curious that you mentioned all of the really circuitous routes that were used to launder this money, for lack of a better term. How did you end up going about tracking all that down, from post office boxes and dusty highways in Arizona to how many investigators did you put on it? How difficult was it to actually trace those various shell organizations?
Well, let me go back a little bit, because I think one of the more interesting aspects of the case was that we received a complaint about 2 weeks prior to the election. And for me, if people don't know who is the donor, then we're doing a disservice if they don't get that information prior to the election, because it's only important. I mean, I think you mentioned a lot of people, if you only do the enforcement 5 years later and they have to pay a small fine, it's the cost of doing business. And that's what happens at the federal level. So, it was very important for us to try to get this information out to the public before the election if this $11 million turned out to have been given by a group that should have disclosed its donors. And that was fascinating, because we filed suit in Sacramento Superior Court and for an injunction, asking for them to submit to an audit and turn over their records to show that they had complied with California law, and they refused to do that. And so we took them to court, and the court said, you need to do it, and you need to do it right away. Of course, their response in court was, we're never going to turn it over by the election anyway, because we're going to keep appealing it, and so there's no reason for you to order us to do this, because it's not going to happen. And so they then appealed. The judge didn't like that, and and ruled that they had to turn it over, and then they appealed it to the Court of Appeal in Sacramento. The Court of Appeal in Sacramento reversed it, and then we took it together with the Attorney General to the Supreme Court of California. And in what was one of the most sort of rare events in the Supreme Court of California history, on the Sunday before the election, they ruled unanimously that they had to submit to an audit by the FPPC. We then had some conversations with them, and we heard later that after the investigation, that they didn't want to turn over their books. So they agreed to say who the donors were, and the donors were, of course, these other nonprofits. It was one, Americans for Job Security in Virginia, and then the Center to Protect Patients' Rights, and then the Americans for Responsible Leadership. And then it went to the California group. After we investigated them after the election, the AG was involved because there was a potential criminal matter. And the person who was the original fundraiser was given immunity from prosecution, and he talked.
Were you satisfied with the outcome? Was the $1 million a sufficient penalty, you think, to deter this kind of activity in the future?
You know, it was the largest campaign fine in California history, but this was groups with a lot of money. They've already spent a lot of money in the Center to Protect Patients' Rights is now named something else. And we didn't make this allegation, but the fundraiser in California said he chose this network because it was the Koch network and he knew that they had a lot of money. So to them, it's not a lot of money, but from what I understand, it had a really big impact on how they have proceeded since, and that they may not be using quite those same kinds of mechanisms.
One of the interesting things that you noted in your talk is that the reason you were able to even get involved in this is that they had sort of reached that pre-election period where issue advocacies become considered election campaigning. I'm wondering if those deadlines are still relevant in this day and age when the elections are really not on election day anymore. In fact, how many have already voted in the June primary here? I suspect, no small number. In fact, we've now reached the point where the majority of Californians are voting before election day. Do you think those periods need to be moved back even further?
Yes, I think they do. And I think there's a number of things that need to be looked at with regard to the rules in campaign finance, and that's one. But also starting to look more carefully at the internet and internet campaigning and disclosures and things like that, because things are changing so much in campaigns, and our laws haven't changed that much since 1974.
I love this audience question because one of the things in journalism we always drill in people is don't use unfamiliar acronyms. This is the first time a member of the public has used an unfamiliar acronym on me, and I'll put it in Ann's question. I think I figured out from context, what can the League of Women Voters really do to make a difference in MIP? I'm assuming that's money in politics.
I'm one of those people that while I'm not sanguine about money in politics, because I, agree with everything that has been said, I'm kind of more of an activist a little bit than a stamper. Although I did stamp a dollar bill from a place I was in, Northampton, Massachusetts. But I kind of want to see results, more immediate results. And one of the things that I think that the League does really well and should continue to do is to get people to vote, get people to know about, what the issues are and why they're important to them. I mean, it's so disconcerting to me how few people, read newspapers, how few people actually get involved in political issues. And I know people are busy, but this is crucial to our lives. It really is. And so that's what I think is important.
You know, let me just add to that, as someone who's been tracking California politics for a while, the League of Women Voters really, especially if they can team with other good government organizations, can really bring a critical mass on issues. I'm thinking of what the League's role in bringing independent redistricting into California. You know, before those two measures were passed, first for the state offices and then for the congressional offices, basically you had politicians in Sacramento who were like choosing their own voters, and oftentimes it was for just crass political reasons. Other times it was just for goofy reasons. Somebody's district would stretch, 8 miles off in one direction, small finger, because he wanted his mother to be in his district. A real life example, a couple of those. So the League of Women Voters really can, particularly in partnering with other organizations, take on issues like this and make a difference. I want to follow up the point you made on disclosure. I always think about disclosure and money in politics is similar to background checks and guns. That it's important, it needs to be done. It's probably in the art of the possible, as you know, a place where you really can at least find common ground with the two parties. It seems like the problem, we talked about this when you've been at our editorial board before, is in California, the website for looking up campaign contributions is so cumbersome, so difficult, so laborious to navigate, that this was something that when Deborah Bowman ran for Secretary of State 7.5 years ago, she was, we asked her about it, she was pledging to change it. 7.5 years later, because it was out of date back then, 7.5 years ago, and the technology has not changed a bit. Isn't that one of the problems, that it's so difficult for people to actually look online and find out who's getting money from where and when?
It's very difficult. It's difficult definitely at the state level, as you say, and that website is abysmal for this day and age. And you look at other websites for corporations, and they're able to provide amazing amounts of information, and we can't do that as a state. Well, we can do it, but we haven't done it. And the same is true. I've seen it at the FEC is somewhat better, but it's also not provided to the public and even the press and other interested organizations that take the information and then promulgate it to others in a way that's easy to access and easy to understand. And that's really what we need to do. And it's not, we're in the midst of Silicon Valley and a lot of innovation. It's not that expensive to do it, and people just need to move forward on it.
And you ought to be able to do it in real time.
Yes.
I don't see why somebody who's watching a congressional hearing on C-SPAN or CNN and wondering why some legislator has taken some goofy position, that they can't look and see what contributions they received in the last couple of weeks.
Well, let me tell you that something that I didn't realize until I got to the FEC is that senators do not file online. They have not, although the FEC has suggested that they do this every year, they don't file their campaign reports online. And what happens is those reports are filed on paper. It goes ultimately to the FEC. They send it to people who, I kid you not, input the information manually at the cost sometimes of like $700,000 a year to do this. And so the information isn't received quickly enough, and it is ridiculous. It's really expensive, but we're working on that, and we're going to make changes there.
Here's a question that came in for me. As a longtime journalist who's written editorials on the pay-to-play mentality in politics, do you think you have developed a jaded view of politicians in general? I'll be interested in your take on this too. And here's my thinking, is I think the overwhelming majority of people who go into politics go into it for the right reason. That they want to make a difference, that they're driven by an idealism oftentimes, by whatever ideology they can come from. I don't think there's Republicans or Democrats or good people, bad people in terms of why they go into politics. I don't think most Republicans who go in and say, I'm going to go in so I can, cater to what big oil and big pharma and all these other special interests want. I don't think, conversely, the Democrats go in because they want to, just take marching orders from the CTA and other labor groups. I think my sense is that it's the system that by necessity is corrupting good people. And when you talk to politicians, with very few exceptions, they hate fundraising. They find it demeaning that they have to pick up the phone and ask people for money. They spend an awful lot of time fundraising. Often, it's not uncommon if you're running for any kind of competitive office that you're spending at least 2, oftentimes 3 hours, sometimes even more than that a day, just raising money. I don't think they like it. There are very few exceptions. Ray Davis was one exception who loved fundraising, very good at it.
And did it quite a bit.
And did it quite a bit. But I think, so I don't become jaded toward politicians because I do think I admire the reason they get into it. The other thing that I really respect about politicians is most of us in our jobs are not judged in the way that politicians are. I mean, you're really putting yourself out there, and that on election day, you're either going to be validated or rejected. And if you are rejected, then you lose that job. I mean, I have a job where I get a lot of feedback from the public, but just because everybody's angry at an editorial on a particular day doesn't mean I lose my job, as long as the right people are not angry. But I really do admire that about people in public service, but I just think the system, before long, ends up corrupting a lot of good people. And the thing that I hear is, so why doesn't it change? Several elected officials have told me this over the years, that the reason it doesn't change is even though you get in there and you hate the system, you figure out how to work it and how to get reelected. So you really can't give it up for door number 3, which may be something that you don't do as well in, that you end up out of office.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Actually, all the politicians that I've met, or the large number of them, are really well-meaning people, and it is expensive to get elected in this state and in the country, and so they're faced with that problem. And one thing that we haven't talked about that I think is kind of problematic is, all this independent money that is being spent, it's not only problematic to the system, which it is, and to the elected officials, it tends to change the tenor of campaigns. And it can be bad for the politicians too, because they have to march to the tune of those independent spenders. And also, in some cases, things are said that they might not otherwise agree with. And it creates a real aura of negativity in campaigning. And I think that is all of the politicians that I've talked to about this, they don't like that either.
I think all of this leads to the last question, which is really a compilation of a number of your questions from the audience, and that is public financing the only answer here? Is that where this is leading to?
I think public finance is probably the best answer to this. And of course, You know, the Supreme Court has also struck down some, Arizona had public financing, and they were also there concerned about the free speech rights of the wealthy candidates in that case too. So you have to structure it in a particular way. And there is some legislation that's been proposed in Congress relating to this. The thing is, people don't seem to support it. The public doesn't seem to support public financing, and I'm not sure why, but I think that is the best solution.
Well, part two of someone's question may explain one of the reasons the public's skeptical is, how are you going to pay for this? I do not want to pay more taxes
Exactly.
for political campaigns.
Well, there's that. And then you sometimes, you have to structure it in a way, I mean, I think a lot of people talk about the mayoral election in San Francisco, which had public financing that was ultimately struck down, but what public financing tends to do also is to support candidates who really on their own might not be able to be viable candidates for a long time. And I think the public doesn't like that either.
We had one candidate in the San Francisco mayoral election, Phil Ting, who is now in the state assembly, who, if you calculated how much public financing went into his campaign and put that against the number of votes, it was something like $400 in public financing for every single vote he received in that election. So you can see why people are skeptical. And again, the thing about public financing is it really does, even if we have a public financing system, it does go to this question of the Supreme Court, even before these last two decisions, has made it abundantly clear that individual candidates have a right to spend as much as they want on their own campaign. And fortunately in California, at least fortunately for those of us who don't like to see wealthy candidates just dominate the landscape, the California political graveyard is littered with wealthy candidates who fail, from Al Checkey to Meg Whitman, a number in between. It seems to correct itself, at least at the statewide level, but locally you do see candidates who get elected as a result of self-financing.
It's some of, just one other note, I mean, some of the campaign finance proposals that are now out there are ones that try to encourage candidates and give money to them if they're able to get small contributions. Because what we really want is to encourage more people to participate in the political system. And that maybe is an answer.
You know, just one final point on the money in politics and public financing. One of the things I hear from the campaigns that they complain about is that the main reasons the campaigns are so expensive, particularly in a populous state like California, is that the TV stations are just gouging them with rates, especially I mean, for them, it's like an ATM machine. When you get close to election, they can charge pretty much whatever they want, and these campaigns and independent expenditures are willing to pay whatever they ask.
Yeah, and the costs of TV time, and they do gouge consultants and the like. I mean, if you look at that whole election industry, it's astounding how much money gets spent.
Thank you very much, Ann. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Ravel, and thank you, John Diaz from the San Francisco Chronicle. So we wanted to give you time, and I know John was very generous about his time, but I said, you both have very busy lives, so I know many audience, sometimes they're too shy to ask the question and they do want to meet with you. So I wanted to give you time for the next 15 minutes to meet up. You can go ahead and approach the stage, and if you could please just let our guests go by about 8 o'clock so they can catch flights or get some sleep, that sort of thing. But I wanted to thank again everyone that attended here, also from our board, Evelyn Cormier, and also Linda Maureen. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Delmo, Deladora, Stan Hubert, thank you for making this happen tonight.